The morning sun cast long shadows across the wheat fields of New Haven Colony. Sarah Chen walked slowly between the golden rows, checking each plant with the care of someone who truly loved their work. The grain swayed gently in the artificial breeze created by the atmospheric processors that kept this world habitable for human life. New Haven was one of humanity's newer settlements, built on a planet orbiting a young star 67 light-years from Earth. The colony had been established 12 years ago by families seeking a simpler life away from the crowded cities of the core worlds. Here, people could breathe clean air, grow their own food, and watch their children play under an alien sky. Sarah paused to examine a particularly healthy stalk of wheat. The genetic modifications her team had made were working perfectly. This strain could grow in the slightly different soil composition of New Haven, while maintaining all the nutritional value of Earth wheat. It was work that made her proud. They were not just surviving on this distant world. They were thriving. "Mom, look what I found." Her 8-year-old daughter Emma came running through the field, holding something cupped in her small hands. Sarah smiled as Emma approached, her face bright with excitement. "What is it, sweetheart?" Sarah asked, kneeling down to Emma's level. Emma carefully opened her hands to reveal a small, iridescent beetle unlike anything found on Earth. The creature's shell shimmered with colors that shifted from deep blue to bright green as it moved. "It was sitting on one of the monitoring posts," Emma explained. "I think it likes the humming sound the machines make." Sarah studied the beetle carefully. The local wildlife on New Haven was generally harmless, but the colonists had learned to be cautious about new species. "This one looked familiar, though." "I think that's a harmony beetle," she said. "Dr. Martinez showed me pictures of them last week. They're completely safe, and they actually help the crops by eating harmful insects." Emma grinned and gently set the beetle down on a nearby plant. They watched as it crawled along the wheat stalk, its shell continuing to shimmer in the sunlight. "Can we keep some in our garden?" Emma asked. "We can try," Sarah replied. "But remember, this is their home too. We're just guests here." This was the philosophy that guided most of the Outer Rim colonies. Humans had learned from the mistakes made on Earth centuries ago. They approached new worlds with respect, taking only what they needed and giving back whenever possible. The technology existed to completely reshape these planets, to make them identical to Earth, but the colonists chose a different path. They adapted themselves to fit the worlds rather than forcing the worlds to fit them. As Sarah and Emma made their way back toward the main settlement, they could see the daily life of New Haven unfolding around them. In the distance, the mining crews were heading out to the mineral extraction sites in their heavy vehicles. The deposits on New Haven were rich in rare earth elements that were essential for the advanced technology that kept human civilization running. But the mining was done carefully, with strict environmental controls to minimize damage to the planet's ecosystem. Near the settlement's center, children played in the community playground while their parents worked in the various workshops and laboratories that kept the colony functioning. The school was in session, and through the large windows, Sarah could see her neighbor Tom Chen teaching a group of teenagers about the local geology. The colony's design was simple but efficient. All the buildings were constructed from locally manufactured materials, designed to blend with the natural landscape rather than dominate it. Solar collectors and wind generators provided clean energy, while the atmospheric processors maintained a breathable environment in the settled areas. Sarah's comm device chimed softly, indicating an incoming message. She touched the small device clipped to her ear and heard the voice of Dr. Janet Martinez, the colony's chief administrator. "Sarah, could you join me in the communications center when you have a moment? We've received some interesting data from the Deep Space Monitoring Array." "On my way," Sarah replied. She turned to Emma. "Why don't you go find your friends? I need to check on something with Dr. Martinez." Emma nodded and ran off toward the playground, already calling out to her classmates. Sarah watched her go for a moment, feeling the familiar warmth of contentment that came from watching her daughter grow up in this peaceful place. The communications center was located in the administrative building at the heart of the settlement. As Sarah entered, she found Dr. Martinez studying a holographic display showing the local star system. Janet was a tall woman in her 50s with graying hair and the kind of calm demeanor that made her perfect for leadership roles in isolated communities. "What's the situation?" Sarah asked, joining Janet at the display. "Long-range sensors picked up some unusual activity about 2 days ago," Janet explained. pointing to a section of the hologram showing the outer edge of their star system. Several large objects entered our system and have been moving steadily inward. Their trajectory suggests they're heading our way. Sarah studied the display. The objects were clearly artificial, much too large and regular in shape to be asteroids. Have you tried to establish communication? We've been broadcasting standard greeting protocols for the past 18 hours, Janet replied. No response so far. The objects are still about 6 hours away at their current speed. This was not entirely unusual. New Haven and the other Outer Rim colonies occasionally received visits from alien vessels. Most were traders or explorers, curious about the human settlements but generally peaceful. The established first contact protocols were designed to handle such situations smoothly. What's your assessment? Sarah asked. As one of the senior colonists, her opinion carried weight in colony decisions. Janet was quiet for a moment, studying the approaching ships. I'm not sure, she admitted. Something feels different about this group. They're maintaining perfect formation, and they haven't responded to any of our communications attempts. Most peaceful visitors would have at least acknowledged our signals by now. Sarah nodded. Should we contact the other colonies? Get their input? Already have, Janet said. Riverside Colony reported similar ships in their system yesterday. They lost contact about 4 hours ago. A cold feeling settled in Sarah's stomach. Riverside Colony was only 12 light-years away, with a population of about 8,000 people. Losing contact was highly unusual. The quantum communication systems used by the colonies were extremely reliable. What about Sterling Base? Sarah asked, referring to the mining colony in the next system over. No response to our calls, Janet replied grimly. I've also tried to reach the Colonial Administration on Kepler Prime, but there seems to be some kind of interference affecting long-range communications. The implications were becoming clear, and Sarah didn't like them. 3 colonies losing contact in the span of a day was not a coincidence. What are our options? Janet activated another section of the holographic display, showing New Haven's defensive capabilities. Like all Outer Rim colonies, they had basic security measures, shields that could protect against small meteor impacts or solar flares, and a few security vehicles armed with crowd control weapons. But these defenses were designed for natural disasters and minor civil disturbances, not military threats. We could evacuate, Janet said. The transport ships could get most of our people off planet within a few hours, but we'd be abandoning everything we've built here, Sarah finished. And we don't know if running would even help. These ships might be faster than our transports. They stood in silence for several minutes, watching the alien ships continue their steady approach. Finally, Janet spoke again. I think we should prepare for the worst while hoping for the best. Get the emergency protocols ready, but also try one more time to establish peaceful contact. Sarah agreed. I'll help coordinate the evacuation preparations. How long do we have? At their current speed, about 5 hours, Janet replied. But Sarah, if these ships are hostile, and if they've already attacked the other colonies, our evacuation might not be enough. These Outer Rim settlements were never designed to defend against a serious military threat. As Sarah left the communication center, her mind was racing. She thought about Emma playing with her friends, about the wheat fields that were just weeks away from harvest, about the life they had built on this distant world. The colonists had chosen this peaceful existence, but peace required that everyone involved choose it. If these alien ships brought war, then everything would change. She activated her comm device and began sending messages to the other senior colonists. Within an hour, the entire settlement was quietly mobilizing. Families packed emergency bags while trying not to alarm the children. The transport ships were prepared for rapid departure. The few security personnel checked their equipment and took positions around the settlement's perimeter. But even as they prepared to flee, the colonists continued their daily routines. The school remained in session. The mining crews completed their shifts. The research teams finished their experiments. This was the human way, to maintain hope and normalcy even in the face of uncertainty. As the alien ships drew closer, their details became clearer on the long-range sensors. They were definitely warships, bristling with weapons and armor plating. Their design was unfamiliar, suggesting they belonged to a species that had not previously made contact with humanity. Dr. Martinez made one final attempt at communication, broadcasting on all frequencies. Unknown vessels, this is New Haven Colony. We are a peaceful settlement engaged in agricultural and mining activities. Please identify yourselves and state your intentions." The response came not in words but in actions. The alien ships split into 3 groups, positioning themselves around the planet in a classic orbital bombardment formation. Then, without warning or explanation, they opened fire. The first explosions lit up the morning sky like deadly fireworks. The colony's shields lasted for exactly 14 seconds before overloading and failing. Sarah was helping to load children onto the transport ships when the ground shook beneath her feet. She looked up to see pillars of fire rising from the mining sites and the agricultural processing centers. "Move, everyone move!" she shouted, pushing Emma and the other children toward the waiting ships. But even as she ran, she knew they were too late. The alien vessels had positioned themselves perfectly to prevent any escape. The transport ship Sarah was trying to reach exploded in a ball of flame just 50 meters away from her. The blast wave knocked her to the ground, her ears ringing from the concussion. Through the smoke and chaos, she could see the other transport ships suffering the same fate. The bombardment lasted for 23 minutes. When it finally stopped, New Haven Colony was gone. The buildings were rubble, the fields were burning, and the dreams of 8,000 colonists had been reduced to ash and smoke. But some had survived. Sarah found herself in a crater with Emma and about 30 other colonists. They were hurt, scared, and confused, but they were alive. Around them, the remains of their peaceful settlement smoldered in the alien sun. The attacking ships descended from orbit, landing in the ruins of what had been the settlement's center. From their hulls emerged creatures that walked on 2 legs like humans but were clearly alien. They wore powered armor and carried weapons that hummed with energy. Sarah held Emma close as the aliens began rounding up the survivors. She watched in horror as families were separated, as the elderly and injured were simply left behind. These creatures showed no emotion, no recognition that they were dealing with living, thinking beings. As she was forced aboard one of the alien ships, Sarah caught a glimpse of the colony's communications array. Somehow it was still intact. If their final distress signal had gotten through, if someone back on Earth or the core worlds knew what had happened here. But that hope seemed small and distant as the alien ship lifted off, carrying the survivors away from the world they had called home. In the cargo hold where they were kept, Sarah held her daughter and whispered the words that had been humanity's promise to itself for generations. "Someone will come for us. Someone will make this right." She had no way of knowing that similar scenes were playing out across dozens of other human colonies. The aliens, who called themselves the Zephyrian hegemony, had decided that humanity's peaceful expansion into their claimed territory would not be tolerated. They saw the lightly defended colonies as proof of human weakness, an opportunity to expand their own empire with minimal resistance. What the Zephyrians did not understand was that they had just made the greatest mistake in their species' history. They had not defeated humanity. They had simply announced their presence to a sleeping giant, and that giant was about to wake up very, very angry. The quantum transmission reached Earth's colonial defense network at 1447 Universal Standard Time. It was fragmented, damaged by interference and distance, but the core message was clear, enough to send shockwaves through every level of human, government, and military command. Admiral Rebecca Torres was reviewing fleet deployment reports in her office on Luna Station when her aide, Lieutenant Commander Kim Park, burst through the door without knocking. The young officer's face was pale and her hands were shaking as she held a data pad. "Admiral, you need to see this immediately," Kim said, her voice tight with barely controlled emotion. Rebecca looked up from her reports, noting the lieutenant commander's distress. In her 25 years of military service, she had learned to recognize the signs of truly bad news. "What is it, Kim?" "We've received emergency transmissions from the Outer Rim colonies," Kim replied, activating the wall display. "At least 17 settlements have been attacked. The signals are broken up, but the parts we can decode. The display filled with static-laden images and fragmented audio. Through the interference, Rebecca could make out scenes of destruction. Burning buildings, panicked civilians, and explosions lighting up alien skies. The audio was equally disturbing. Voices calling for help, children crying, and the unmistakable sounds of weapons fire. "Jesus Christ," Rebecca whispered, standing up from her desk. "How many casualties?" "We don't know yet," Kim replied. "Most of the colonies have gone completely silent. The few that are still transmitting are reporting massive damage and civilian deaths. New Haven Colony managed to get out a partial message before they were cut off. Population 8,000 presumed lost. Rebecca felt a cold anger settling in her chest. New Haven was one of the newer settlements, populated mostly by families with young children. She had visited there 2 years ago during a routine inspection tour and remembered the pride the colonists had taken in their peaceful community. "Who's responsible?" she asked. Kim activated another section of the display showing a tactical analysis compiled by the Colonial Intelligence Division. Unknown alien force, apparently calling themselves the Zephyrian Hegemony. Ship designs don't match any known species in our databases. Intelligence estimates at least 200 vessels involved in the coordinated attacks. 200 ships, Rebecca repeated slowly. This wasn't some random raid. This was planned, coordinated. They meant to hit us hard. The door to Rebecca's office opened again and General Marcus Stone walked in. Marcus was the commanding officer of Earth's ground forces, a tall man with graying hair and scars that told the story of a long military career. His expression was grim as he approached the display. "I've been monitoring the situation from Command Central," Marcus said without preamble. "It's worse than we initially thought. The attacks weren't just random strikes. They targeted specific colonies, ones with strategic value. Mining operations, agricultural centers, research facilities. Someone did their homework." Rebecca nodded grimly. "What's our current alert status?" "DEFCON 2 as of 10 minutes ago," Marcus replied. "All fleet elements are moving to high readiness. The President has authorized mobilization of reserve forces. But Rebecca, we need to talk about response options." The three officers stood in silence for a moment, watching the fragmentary reports continue to stream in from the outer rim. Each update brought news of another colony gone silent, another peaceful community destroyed by alien aggression. "What do we know about these Zephyrians?" Rebecca asked. Kim consulted her datapad. "Very little. No previous contact with human forces. Their ship designs suggest advanced technology, possibly more advanced than ours in some areas, but the limited tactical data we have suggests they weren't expecting any significant resistance from the colonies." "Because there wasn't any," Marcus said bitterly. "The Outer Rim settlements were never designed for military defense. A few security vehicles and crowd control weapons against a full military assault? They never had a chance." Rebecca studied the tactical display, her mind automatically calculating distances, response times, and resource requirements. "How long would it take us to get relief forces to the Outer Rim?" "With our fastest ships, at least 3 weeks to reach the nearest affected colonies," Kim replied. "But Admiral, even if we could get there tomorrow, it might already be too late. Some of these settlements have been completely destroyed." The comm system on Rebecca's desk chimed with an incoming priority message. She activated it, and the holographic image of President Catherine Hayes appeared above the desk. The president looked tired, as if she had been awake for days, but her expression was determined. "Admiral Torres, General Stone," the president said. "I assume you've been briefed on the situation in the Outer Rim?" "Yes, Madam President," Rebecca replied. "We're still gathering intelligence, but it appears to be a coordinated attack by a previously unknown alien force." "The death toll?" President Hayes asked. Marcus stepped forward. "Preliminary estimates suggest over 100,000 civilian casualties across 17 colonies. Many settlements have gone completely silent, so the actual numbers could be much higher." President Hayes closed her eyes for a moment, and when she opened them again, there was something cold and hard in her expression that Rebecca had never seen before. "I've been in contact with the other core world governments. Earth, Mars, Europa, and the Centauri Republic are in complete agreement on our response." "What are your orders, Madam President?" Rebecca asked. "I want you to prepare a message for transmission to these Zephyrians," President Hayes said. "Make it clear, simple, and unmistakable. They have 72 hours to withdraw from human space and release any prisoners they may have taken. After that," the president paused, and Rebecca could see the weight of command settling on her shoulders. When she spoke again, her voice was steady and final. "After that, we remind the galaxy why humanity chose peace in the first place." The transmission was prepared with care. Every word was chosen for maximum clarity and minimum ambiguity. The message was encoded in 17 different alien languages, transmitted on every known communication frequency, and broadcast with enough power to reach every corner of the local galactic arm. The message was simple: to the forces identifying as the Zephyrian Hegemony, You have attacked peaceful human settlements, killing civilians and destroying communities that posed no threat to your people. You have 72 standard hours to withdraw all forces from human space and release any prisoners you have taken. This is not a negotiation. This is not a request. This is your only warning. Failure to comply will result in consequences you cannot imagine and will not survive. The message was signed not by any individual leader, but simply humanity. The response from the Zephyrian High Command came 18 hours later. It was broadcast on the same frequencies, but with an arrogance that made Rebecca's blood boil. Inferior human species. The message began in heavily accented Standard Galactic. Your pathetic colonies existed in space claimed by the glorious Zephyrian hegemony. Their destruction was necessary to establish proper order in this region. You will submit to Zephyrian authority, or face the same fate as your scattered settlements. We are the masters of this galaxy. You are nothing. The alien message continued for several more minutes, listing demands for human submission and threatening additional attacks on civilian targets. By the time it ended, every person in the Earth Defense Command Center was silent with rage. President Hayes authorized the second transmission 12 hours before the deadline expired. This message was even shorter than the first. Your response is noted. You have been warned. What the Zephyrians could not see and what they would not understand until far too late was the massive mobilization occurring throughout human space. Ships that had been in mothballs for decades were being rapidly reactivated. Military personnel who had retired to peaceful lives on the colony worlds were reporting back to duty. Factories that had been producing consumer goods were retooling for military production. But most importantly, deep in the hidden military bases scattered throughout human space, systems that had been dormant for generations were coming online. Weapons that had been built but never used were being loaded onto ships. Plans that had been developed in secret and filed away were being dusted off and updated. Rebecca stood on the observation deck of Luna Station, looking out at the fleet assembly area. In the past 48 hours, over 300 warships had arrived from across the solar system. More were arriving every hour. These weren't the small patrol vessels that normally protected the trade routes. These were ships of the line, dreadnoughts, battlecruisers, and carriers that existed for one purpose only. Impressive sight, isn't it? General Stone said, joining her at the observation window. I had forgotten how many ships we actually have, Rebecca admitted. It's been so long since we needed them all in one place. The Outer Rim colonists weren't the only ones who chose peace, Marcus replied. We all did. But choosing peace and being incapable of war are two very different things. Below them, the final preparations were being made. Supply ships loaded with ammunition and spare parts. Troop transports filled with Marines who had trained for years, but never expected to see actual combat. Medical ships prepared to handle casualties on a scale that hadn't been seen in human space for over a century. Do you think the Zephyrians understand what they've started? Rebecca asked. Marcus was quiet for a long moment. No, he said finally. I don't think they have any idea. They saw our peaceful colonies and assumed we were weak. They made the same mistake that others have made throughout human history. Which mistake is that? They confused our choice to be civilized with an inability to be otherwise. The 72-hour deadline passed with no response from the Zephyrian forces. In fact, intelligence reports suggested that they were reinforcing their positions in human space, bringing in additional ships, and beginning the systematic looting of the destroyed colonies. At exactly 72 hours and 1 minute after the original deadline, Admiral Torres sent a different kind of message. This one was not transmitted to the Zephyrians. Instead, it went out to every human military unit in the galaxy. Operation Righteous Fury is now active. All units are weapons-free. Show them what we are. The response was immediate. Across human space, warships that had been hiding in the outer darkness began moving toward their assigned targets. Strike forces that had been positioning themselves in the outer systems engaged their faster-than-light drives. Attack squadrons launched from hidden bases that most people didn't even know existed. The Zephyrian hegemony had made their choice. They had attacked peaceful civilians, ignored warnings, and mistaken human mercy for weakness. Now they were about to learn the difference between humanity at peace and humanity at war. In the cargo holds of the Zephyrian ships, human prisoners like Sarah Chen and her daughter Emma huddled together in the darkness, not knowing that help was already on the way. They couldn't see the massive fleet movements occurring throughout human space, couldn't know about the anger and determination that was driving every human military unit toward a single goal, but they would know soon enough. Because humanity had spent centuries learning to be peaceful, but they had never forgotten how to be dangerous. And the Zephyrians were about to discover that when you attack someone's family, when you hurt their children and destroy their homes, you don't just start a war. You wake up something that should have been left alone. The galaxy was about to remember why humanity had been given such a wide berth when they first emerged from their home system. It was about to remember why other species spoke of humans in whispers, why the old stories told of creatures that could not be reasoned with, could not be deterred, and would never ever stop coming for those who hurt the things they loved. The Zephyrians had wanted to establish their dominance in this region of space. Instead, they had just provided humanity with a reason to remind everyone what they were truly capable of when pushed too far. The 72 hours were over. Now the real lesson would begin. High Commander Zektar of the Zephyrian hegemony stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Eternal Dominion, watching the tactical displays with satisfaction. The human settlements had been easier to destroy than his strategist had predicted. Weak defenses, minimal military presence, and civilian populations that scattered like prey animals at the first sign of danger. Status report on the occupation forces, he commanded, his forearms crossed behind his back in the traditional posture of Zephyrian authority. Sub-Commander Velthar approached with a data tablet clutched in his secondary hands. The mining operations on New Haven are already producing useful materials for the fleet. The human survivors are proving adequate as manual laborers, though several have died from the work conditions. Zektar nodded approvingly. Expected. The inferior species was not bred for proper labor. What of the other conquered territories? Sterling Base has been completely stripped of valuable minerals. Riverside Colony's agricultural facilities are being converted to produce food for our forces. The humans there have been more difficult to manage. Then manage them more firmly, Zektar replied coldly. Dead humans serve no purpose, but neither do disobedient ones. The bridge was suddenly filled with the sound of an alarm. Zektar turned sharply toward the sensor station, where the operator was staring at his displays with confusion. Report, Zektar commanded. High Commander, we're detecting multiple faster-than-light signatures at the edge of the system. Large objects approaching at high speed. Zektar moved to the sensor station, studying the readings himself. The displays showed dozens of contacts emerging from hyperspace, their energy signatures unlike anything in the Zephyrian database. Could these be more human civilian ships fleeing from other colonies? Velthar asked. No, Zektar said slowly, his combat experience telling him something was very wrong. These signatures are too large, too powerful. And they're not running away. They're coming toward us. The first human ships dropped out of hyperspace at the outer edge of the system, and immediately Zektar knew he had made a terrible miscalculation. These were not civilian vessels or lightly armed patrol ships. These were warships on a scale that dwarfed his own flagship. The lead vessel was over 3 kilometers long, its hull black as the void between stars and bristling with weapons systems that the Zephyrian sensors couldn't even properly identify. Behind it came a formation of smaller but equally menacing ships, each one radiating the kind of energy signatures that suggested military technology far more advanced than anything the Zephyrians had encountered. How many ships? Zektar asked, his voice betraying none of the growing concern he felt. Still counting, High Commander. Current total is 47 vessels, but more are arriving every few minutes. 47 ships. Zektar's entire force in this system consisted of 31 vessels. And while they had been sufficient to destroy the undefended human colonies, he was beginning to suspect they would not be adequate for what was approaching. Attempt to establish communication, he ordered. The communications officer worked at his station for several minutes before looking up with frustration. The human ships are not responding to any of our transmission attempts, High Commander. They appear to be maintaining complete communication silence. Then we will speak to them in the language they understand, Zektar decided. All ships battle formation. Prepare to engage the human fleet. But as his ships moved into their attack positions, something strange happened. The human vessels didn't respond with defensive maneuvers or aggressive positioning. Instead, they simply continued their steady advance toward the inner system, as if the Zephyrian fleet wasn't even worth acknowledging. High Commander, the sensor operator called out, his voice tight with disbelief. More human ships are arriving. Current count is 74 vessels, 74 ships and more arriving by the minute. Zektar was beginning to understand that he might have seriously underestimated the human response to his attacks on their colonies. "Fire a warning shot," he commanded. "Let them know we are here and prepared to defend our conquered territory." The Eternal Dominion's main batteries opened fire, sending brilliant bolts of plasma energy across the space between the two fleets. The shots were carefully aimed to pass just ahead of the lead human vessel, a clear warning that could be understood by any spacefaring species. The human ships continued their advance without changing course or speed. They didn't even acknowledge that they had been fired upon. "High Commander," Velthar said quietly, "perhaps we should consider withdrawing to a more defensible position. Our orders were to secure the human colonies, not to engage in fleet combat with unknown forces." Zektar's pride as a Zephyrian commander warred with his growing tactical concern. The human fleet was now numbering over 100 ships, and their behavior was unlike anything he had encountered in 30 years of military service. They moved with a precision that suggested extensive battle experience, but they also displayed a kind of cold patience that was somehow more disturbing than outright aggression. "No retreat," he decided. "We are Zephyrian warriors. We do not flee from inferior species regardless of their numbers." The decision proved to be the last mistake Zektar would ever make. The human attack, when it finally came, was unlike anything the Zephyrians had experienced in their long history of conquest. There was no preliminary bombardment, no maneuvering for advantageous positions, no attempts at intimidation or psychological warfare. Instead, the human ships simply opened fire with every weapon they possessed all at once, with a coordination that spoke of countless hours of training and preparation. The first volley erased 6 Zephyrian ships from existence in less than 3 seconds. The weapons the humans used were beyond anything in the Zephyrian arsenal. Energy beams that punched through shields and armor as if they weren't there, missiles that seemed to actively hunt their targets, and some kind of kinetic projectiles that hit with the force of small asteroids. Zektar watched in horror as his carefully arranged battle formation dissolved into chaos. His ships were trying to return fire, but their weapons seemed pathetically inadequate against the human vessels. Plasma bolts that should have crippled enemy ships were simply absorbed by shields that appeared to be operating on completely different principles than Zephyrian technology. "Damage report," he shouted over the alarms filling the bridge. "The glorious conquest and the eternal victory have been destroyed," Velthar reported, his voice shaking. "The righteous might is venting atmosphere. The Imperial will has lost all power and is drifting." "How long has this engagement been running?" Zektar demanded. 47 seconds, High Commander. 47 seconds, and they had already lost a quarter of their fleet. This wasn't a battle. It was an execution. "All ships, emergency withdrawal," Zektar commanded. "Jump to hyperspace immediately." But even as his remaining ships tried to disengage, the humans demonstrated another terrifying capability. Some of their vessels fired weapons that seemed to disrupt the space around the Zephyrian ships, preventing them from entering hyperspace. The few ships that managed to escape the disruption fields found themselves pursued by human vessels that were somehow faster in hyperspace than they were in normal space. The retreat became a rout, and the rout became a massacre. Within 2 hours, the entire Zephyrian force that had conquered New Haven had been eliminated. Not defeated, eliminated. The humans had shown no mercy, taken no prisoners, and demonstrated a level of military capability that made the Zephyrian hegemony's previous conquests look like children playing with toys. But the humans weren't finished. As the last of Zektar's ships was destroyed, the human fleet split into smaller groups and disappeared into hyperspace, heading toward every system where Zephyrian forces had established a presence. On the bridge of the human flagship Righteous Fury, Admiral Rebecca Torres watched the tactical displays with grim satisfaction. The first engagement had gone exactly as planned. The Zephyrians had underestimated human military capability by several orders of magnitude, and they were paying the price for their mistake. "Status report, Commander Park," she said. "All Zephyrian vessels in this system have been neutralized," Kim replied from her position at the tactical station. "No human casualties. The rescue teams are moving to extract survivors from the New Haven prisoner ships." "Good. What's our intelligence on other Zephyrian positions?" Fleet reconnaissance has identified 17 systems where they've established occupation forces. Admiral Chen's task force is moving to engage their stronghold at Riverside Colony. Admiral Okafor is heading for Sterling Base. The remaining groups are targeting their supply lines and reinforcement routes. Rebecca nodded. Make sure our forces understand the rules of engagement. Any Zephyrian military personnel who surrender will be taken prisoner, according to standard conventions. Any who resist will be eliminated. But I want every human survivor rescued alive. Understood. Admiral? Rebecca turned back to the tactical display, where she could see icons representing human fleets moving throughout the local galactic region. Each icon represented dozens of ships and thousands of personnel, all focused on a single goal, making the Zephyrians regret their decision to attack human civilians. But this was about more than revenge. This was about sending a message to the entire galaxy. Humanity had chosen peace, had deliberately limited their military expansion in favor of peaceful colonization and trade. But that choice had been based on the assumption that others would respect human peaceful intentions. The Zephyrians had demonstrated that this assumption was incorrect. They had mistaken human restraint for weakness, human civilization for vulnerability. Now they would learn the difference between a species that chose peace and a species that was incapable of war. Over the next 72 hours, the Zephyrian hegemony's military forces throughout the region were systematically destroyed. Human fleets appeared without warning in system after system, overwhelming Zephyrian defenders with superior technology, tactics, and sheer determination. The Battle of Riverside Colony lasted 14 minutes. The engagement at Sterling Base was over in 8. The Zephyrian supply depot at Kepler 442 was eliminated so quickly that the garrison didn't have time to send a distress signal. But the humans weren't just winning battles. They were demonstrating capabilities that redefined what other species thought they knew about human technology. Ships that could jump directly into close combat range, weapons that ignored known physical laws, shields that seemed to grow stronger under fire rather than weaker. Where had these capabilities come from? The galaxy had observed human expansion for decades, and while they were known to be technologically advanced, nothing had suggested they possessed military technology on this scale. The answer was simple. Humanity had been preparing for this possibility for generations, not because they wanted war, but because they understood that someone somewhere would eventually mistake their peaceful nature for an invitation to aggression. Every human colony ship had been accompanied by automated defense systems that could activate if threatened. Every trade route had been secretly patrolled by stealth vessels that most species couldn't even detect. Every human settlement had been positioned within range of hidden military bases that could deploy fleets within hours of receiving a distress signal. The Zephyrians had seen the peaceful facade and assumed it was all there was. They had never suspected that beneath the surface, humanity maintained one of the most advanced and capable military forces in the galaxy. Now they were learning the truth, but the lesson was coming at a price they couldn't afford to pay. As reports of the systematic destruction of their forces reached the Zephyrian High Command, panic began to spread through their government. This wasn't supposed to happen. The humans were supposed to be weak, scattered, easy to conquer. Instead, they had revealed themselves to be something far more dangerous than anyone had imagined. But the humans were just getting started. The destruction of the Zephyrian occupation forces was only the first phase of their response. Now came the second phase, demonstrating to the entire galaxy that attacking human civilians was a mistake no species would ever want to make twice. The Zephyrians had awakened something that had been sleeping by choice. Now they would face the consequences of that awakening, and the galaxy would remember why humanity had been given such a wide berth when they first emerged from their home system. The creatures the Zephyrians couldn't command were coming for them, and there would be no place in the galaxy where they could hide from human justice. Supreme Overlord Thekmaran of the Zephyrian hegemony stood before the Great War Council in the capital city of Zephyr Prime, his forearms trembling with rage and disbelief. Around the massive circular chamber, the greatest military minds of his empire struggled to make sense of reports that defied everything they thought they knew about warfare. Explain to me again how an entire battle fleet can simply disappear, Thekmaran demanded, his voice echoing off the crystalline walls of the council chamber. War Marshal Kek Thul, the eldest and most experienced military commander in the hegemony, consulted his data tablets with obvious distress. Supreme Overlord, the situation is unprecedented. Fleet Command Sigma, consisting of 43 vessels, including 2 of our newest dreadnoughts, was completely destroyed in the Kepler 442 system. The engagement lasted less than 12 minutes. 12 minutes to destroy 43 ships? Tegmaran's voice rose to a dangerous pitch. These are human vessels we are discussing, not some legendary alien superpower. With respect, Supreme Overlord, another council member interjected. Perhaps our intelligence regarding human capabilities was incomplete. Tegmaran's eyes blazed as he turned toward the speaker. Incomplete? We observed their colonies for months before the attacks. Peaceful settlements with minimal defenses, agricultural worlds and mining operations. Nothing that suggested significant military capability. That appears to have been the point, War Marshal Kek Thul said quietly. Our analysts now believe the humans deliberately maintained the appearance of weakness while concealing their true military strength. The Supreme Overlord began pacing around the circular chamber, his clawed feet clicking against the polished stone floor. How many fleets have we lost in the past week? 17 battle groups, Supreme Overlord. Approximately 430 vessels of various classes. We estimate that over 60,000 of our finest warriors have been killed or are missing in action. The numbers were staggering. The Zephyrian hegemony had built their empire over centuries of careful conquest, always choosing targets they could defeat with minimal losses. They had never faced an enemy capable of inflicting casualties on this scale. What do we know about human military technology? Tegmaran asked. War Marshal Kek Thul activated a holographic display in the center of the chamber. The images showed fragmentary sensor data from the few Zephyrian ships that had survived contact with human forces long enough to transmit battlefield intelligence. Their weapons operate on principles we don't fully understand, he explained. Energy weapons that seem to ignore our shield frequencies, kinetic projectiles that hit with impossible force, and some kind of missile system that actively pursues targets even after they've changed course multiple times. But more concerning than their technology is their tactical doctrine, another council member added. They don't fight like any species we've encountered. They show no interest in posturing, no concern for casualties, and no apparent limit to the resources they're willing to commit. Tegmaran studied the tactical displays, trying to understand how his mighty empire had suddenly found itself on the defensive against a species they had dismissed as weak and scattered. What about their fleet numbers? He asked. Unknown, Supreme Overlord. Every engagement has revealed new human vessels that don't match any of our previous intelligence. Our estimates of their total military capability have been revised upward 17 times in the past week, and we still don't believe we have accurate numbers. The chamber fell silent as the full implications of this information settled over the council. The Zephyrian hegemony had built their empire by carefully choosing targets they could defeat. But they had apparently chosen to attack an enemy whose true strength they had completely failed to understand. Recommendations? Tegmaran demanded. We should consider opening negotiations, one of the younger council members suggested. If we offer to return their prisoners and withdraw from the disputed territories, perhaps. Absolutely not, Tegmaran roared. The hegemony does not negotiate with inferior species. We do not withdraw from territories we have rightfully claimed. Then we must find a way to defeat them militarily, War Marshal Kek Thul said. I recommend we consolidate our remaining forces and make a decisive strike against their home system. If we can threaten their core worlds, they may be willing to accept a negotiated settlement. Tegmaran considered this option. It was risky, but it might be their only chance to salvage something from this disaster. How many ships can we assemble for such an operation? If we strip the border defenses and recall all our expeditionary forces, we could field approximately 800 vessels, including 12 of our most powerful dreadnoughts and the personal flagship of the hegemony itself. Do it, Tegmaran decided. Gather every ship we have. We will show these humans the true power of the Zephyrian hegemony. But even as the orders went out to assemble the greatest fleet in Zephyrian history, events were unfolding that would make this massive military effort irrelevant. 3 star systems away, Captain Maria Santos of the human stealth ship Shadow Walker observed a Zephyrian supply convoy, making its way through what the aliens believed was secure territory. The convoy consisted of 12 cargo vessels and 4 escort ships, carrying supplies and reinforcements to Zephyrian forces still holding positions in the outer rim. Target assessment complete, her tactical officer reported. The cargo ships appear to be carrying military equipment and personnel. The escorts are light cruisers, nothing we can't handle. Maria nodded. Signal the task force. All ships prepare for coordinated strike. The Shadow Walker was not alone. Invisible to Zephyrian sensors, a dozen human stealth ships had been shadowing the convoy for the past 2 days, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. All ships report ready, Captain. Execute. The attack was swift and merciless. The Zephyrian convoy was completely destroyed within minutes. Another small piece of the alien empire's military capability, eliminated by human forces that appeared from nowhere and vanished just as quickly. But this was just one of hundreds of similar operations taking place throughout Zephyrian space. Human forces had moved beyond simply responding to the attacks on their colonies. They were now actively hunting Zephyrian military assets wherever they could find them. The humans fought with a combination of advanced technology and tactical innovation that left their enemies struggling to adapt. They used stealth capabilities to appear without warning, deployed weapons that seemed to violate known laws of physics, and demonstrated a level of coordination that suggested their entire military force was operating according to a single, unified plan. But perhaps most disturbing to the Zephyrians was the humans' apparent complete lack of interest in traditional military concepts like negotiation, prisoner exchange, or territorial compromise. They simply kept coming, system after system, fleet after fleet, until every Zephyrian military presence in the region had been eliminated. On the prison ship Eternal Servitude, Sarah Chen and her daughter Emma huddled with the other human survivors from New Haven Colony, listening to the distant sounds of weapons fire and explosions. The Zephyrian guards had become increasingly nervous over the past few days, speaking in urgent whispers and constantly checking their communication devices. "Mom, what's happening?" Emma asked quietly. Sarah put her arm around her daughter. "I think help is coming," she whispered back. She was right. Outside the prison ship, human Marines were systematically eliminating the Zephyrian guards and crew. These were soldiers unlike anything the galaxy had seen before. Men and women who moved with deadly precision, equipped with armor that made them nearly invulnerable, and weapons that could cut through alien defenses like paper. The rescue operation lasted exactly 14 minutes. When it was over, every human prisoner had been freed, and every Zephyrian on the ship was either dead or wishing they were. As Sarah and Emma were helped aboard the human rescue vessel, Sarah got her first good look at the soldiers who had saved them. They were professional, efficient, and completely focused on their mission. But there was something else in their eyes, something cold and implacable that suggested they would not rest until every wrong had been righted. "Are you all right, ma'am?" one of the Marines asked her. "We are now," Sarah replied. "Thank you." "Just doing our job," the Marine said. "Don't worry about the aliens who did this to you. They're going to pay for what they've done." Similar rescue operations were taking place throughout the region. Every human prisoner was being liberated. Every Zephyrian military installation was being destroyed, and every alien who had participated in the attacks on human colonies was learning that there were consequences for attacking peaceful civilizations. The Zephyrian response to this systematic destruction of their forces was to escalate. Supreme Overlord Thekamaran's massive fleet, 800 ships strong, departed Zephyr Prime with orders to strike directly at Earth itself. It was the largest military force the hegemony had ever assembled, and Thekmaran was confident that even the humans couldn't stand against such overwhelming numbers. He was wrong. The human response to this threat was swift and decisive. Long-range sensors detected the Zephyrian fleet while it was still 3 systems away from Earth, and Admiral Torres immediately ordered the deployment of humanity's ultimate military asset, the Sol defense grid. For generations, humanity had been quietly constructing defensive installations throughout their home system, not just orbital platforms around Earth, but a vast network of automated defense stations, hidden military bases, and mobile weapons platforms that could turn the entire solar system into a killing field. When the Zephyrian fleet arrived in the outer reaches of the Sol system, they found themselves facing not just the human ships that had been devastating their forces throughout the region, but an entire star system that had been converted into a fortress. The battle was not even close. The Zephyrian fleet was destroyed in its entirety, 800 ships and their crews eliminated in less than 6 hours of combat. Supreme Overlord Thekmaran himself was killed when his flagship was vaporized by a weapons platform that fired projectiles at a significant fraction of the speed of light. With the destruction of their main fleet and the death of their supreme leader, the Zephyrian hegemony began to collapse from within. Regional governors declared independence, military commanders abandoned their posts, and entire star systems simply surrendered to human forces rather than face the alternative. The war, if it could even be called that, was effectively over. In less than 3 weeks, humanity had gone from being the victims of unprovoked aggression to completely dismantling one of the galaxy's major military powers. But the humans weren't finished yet. They had demonstrated their military superiority, rescued their people, and eliminated the immediate threat. Now came the final lesson, making sure that no other species would ever make the same mistake the Zephyrians had made. The galaxy was watching, and humanity intended to make sure the lesson was clear, unmistakable, and unforgettable. The surrender came not with fanfare or ceremony, but with a simple transmission broadcasted across all frequencies from the remaining Zephyrian government on their homeworld. Acting Supreme Leader Velkaran, a minor administrator who had suddenly found himself in charge of what remained of the hegemony, spoke the words that formally ended the shortest and most one-sided war in galactic history. To the human military forces, the message began, Velkaran's voice shaking with exhaustion and defeat. The Zephyrian hegemony formally requests immediate cessation of hostilities. We surrender unconditionally and await your terms. Admiral Rebecca Torres received the transmission aboard her flagship in orbit around Zephyr Prime. Around her, the bridge crew maintained their professional composure, but she could sense their satisfaction. Justice had been delivered swiftly and completely. Signal all human forces, she ordered. Offensive operations are suspended pending negotiation of surrender terms. Maintain defensive positions and continue search and rescue operations for any remaining human prisoners. The war was over, but the real work was just beginning. Humanity now faced the challenge of transforming their overwhelming military victory into a lasting peace that would prevent similar tragedies in the future. President Catherine Hayes arrived in the Zephyr system aboard the diplomatic vessel New Horizons, 3 days after the surrender. With her came not just negotiators and administrators, but also relief workers, medical personnel, and the resources needed to begin rebuilding the shattered remnants of the Zephyrian hegemony. The meeting took place on Zephyr Prime's largest moon, in a conference facility that had been hastily constructed by human engineering teams. The symbolism was intentional. This was neutral ground, a place where former enemies could meet as equals to discuss the future. Velkaran arrived with a small delegation of surviving Zephyrian officials, their ornate ceremonial armor replaced by simple civilian clothing. The contrast with their previous arrogance was stark and deliberate. President Hayes, Velkaran said as he entered the conference room, his forearms positioned in the Zephyrian gesture of submission. On behalf of what remains of the Zephyrian people, I thank you for agreeing to these negotiations. President Hayes studied the alien leader for a moment before responding. Let's be clear about something from the beginning, she said calmly. We're not here to gloat or to humiliate your people. We're here to ensure that the mistakes that led to this conflict are never repeated. The negotiations lasted for 6 days. The human terms were firm but not cruel. All human prisoners and their remains would be returned immediately. The Zephyrian government would provide full reparations to the families of those killed in the attacks on human colonies. All Zephyrian military forces would be reduced to a size sufficient only for internal security. Most importantly, the hegemony would renounce all claims to territory outside their core systems and would never again raise arms against any peaceful civilization. But the humans also offered something unexpected. Assistance. Your people are not our enemies, President Hayes explained to the Zephyrian delegation. Your leaders made a terrible decision, but that doesn't condemn your entire species to suffering. We will help you rebuild, help you establish a stable government, and help you find a new place in the galactic community. This offer of aid confused many of the Zephyrian officials. In their experience, conquest led to enslavement or extermination. The concept of a victor offering to help the defeated rebuild was completely foreign to their understanding of warfare. Why would you do this? Velkaran asked. You have defeated us completely. You could take whatever you wanted from our worlds. Because that's not who we are, President Hayes replied. We didn't fight this war to gain territory or resources. We fought to protect our people and to ensure that peaceful species can exist without fear of unprovoked aggression. Your people can be part of that future if you choose to be. The formal peace treaty was signed on the 7th day. As the documents were completed, President Hayes made one final statement that would be remembered throughout the galaxy for generations to come. Let this be the last time any species makes the mistake of confusing human kindness for weakness. We chose peace not because we had to, but because we could afford to. We chose civilization not because we were incapable of anything else, but because we believed it was the better path. That choice is still available to everyone in this galaxy, but it must be a choice made by all sides. The treaty signing was broadcast across human space and throughout the galaxy. Species that had been watching the conflict with interest and concern saw something they had never expected. A complete military victory followed not by conquest and exploitation, but by reconciliation and assistance. The aftermath of the war transformed the galactic political landscape in ways that no one had anticipated. The complete destruction of the Zephyrian military had been impressive, but it was humanity's response to victory that truly shocked other civilizations. Within months, human engineering teams were helping to rebuild the infrastructure destroyed during the conflict. Human medical personnel were treating Zephyrian civilians injured in the fighting. Human educators were working with Zephyrian schools to develop new curricula that emphasized peaceful conflict resolution and interspecies cooperation. But most importantly, the human military forces that had appeared so suddenly and fought so effectively began to fade back into the shadows just as quickly. The massive fleets that had devastated Zephyrian forces simply disappeared, returning to hidden bases or resuming the appearance of peaceful civilian vessels. Ambassador Chen Lu, humanity's new diplomatic representative to the reformed Zephyrian government, stood in the observation deck of the rebuilt New Haven colony 6 months after the war's end. Below her, human families were once again working in the wheat fields that had been restored with Zephyrian labor and resources. Sarah Chen approached the observation deck, carrying her daughter Emma, who was now 9 years old and had insisted on helping with the colony's reconstruction efforts. Ambassador Chen, Sarah said with a smile, Emma wanted to show you something. Emma held up a small device that she had been working on in the colony's engineering workshop. It's a translator, she announced proudly. So human and Zephyrian kids can talk to each other when they're playing together. The ambassador examined the device with appropriate seriousness. This is excellent work, Emma. Have you tested it yet? Uh-huh, Emma replied excitedly. There's a Zephyrian family helping to rebuild the school, and they have a boy about my age. We've been teaching each other games from our different planets. This was the future that humanity had fought to preserve. Children of different species playing together, learning from each other, building friendships that would last for generations. It was a future that had been threatened by those who believed that might made right, but which had been secured by those who understood that true strength lay in the choice to protect the innocent. As the months passed, word of humanity's conduct during and after the war spread throughout the galaxy. Other species began to reconsider their previous assessments of human capabilities and intentions. The peaceful human colonies that had seemed like easy targets were now understood to be outposts of a civilization that possessed both the power to destroy any aggressor and the wisdom to choose mercy over vengeance. The Galactic Trade Consortium, which had previously viewed humanity as a minor power of limited importance, suddenly found human representatives being invited to their most important negotiations. The Interspecies Diplomatic Council, which had operated for centuries without human participation, formally requested that humanity accept a permanent seat on their governing board. But perhaps the most significant change was in how conflicts between different species were resolved. The human example had demonstrated that it was possible to achieve complete victory through superior force, while still maintaining moral authority through restraint and mercy. Other civilizations began to adopt similar approaches to their own disputes, choosing negotiation and peaceful resolution over the traditional cycle of conquest and revenge. A year after the end of the war, Admiral Rebecca Torres stood once again on the observation deck of Luna Station, looking out at the fleet assembly area. But now, instead of warships preparing for battle, she watched as the last of humanity's military vessels returned to their hidden bases, or resumed their peaceful missions. "Any regrets, Admiral?" General Marcus Stone asked, joining her at the observation window. "About the war?" "None at all," Rebecca replied. "Those bastards got exactly what they deserved." "About what comes next?" "That remains to be seen." "The politicians seem optimistic," Marcus observed. "They think this will usher in a new era of galactic peace and cooperation." "Maybe it will," Rebecca said. "But we both know that there will always be someone, somewhere, who thinks they can take what isn't theirs by force. The galaxy is a big place, and not everyone learned the lesson we taught the Zephyrians. So we stay ready." "We stay ready," Rebecca confirmed. "But we also hope we never have to use that readiness again." As if to underscore her point, a new message appeared on the communication displays around the observation deck. It was from the colony ship New Endeavor, which had just departed Earth for a star system on the far edge of explored space. "Luna Station, this is Captain Rodriguez aboard the New Endeavor. We are beginning our journey to the Kepler 438 system, where we will establish humanity's newest colony. Our passenger manifest includes 2,000 families seeking a peaceful life among the stars, as well as several dozen Zephyrian volunteers who have requested permission to join our colonial effort. We expect to arrive at our destination in 14 months and will begin broadcasting regular updates once our settlement is established. For now, we send our thanks to all those who made this journey possible, and our hopes for a future where all species can explore the galaxy together in peace." Rebecca smiled as she listened to the message. This was why they had fought. Not for territory or resources, but for the right of peaceful beings to build new homes and new lives without fear of those who would take everything by force. The war with the Zephyrian hegemony was over, but humanity's real mission was just beginning. They had proven that they could defend themselves and others when necessary. Now they had to prove that they could build something better than the cycle of violence that had dominated galactic politics for so long. Throughout the galaxy, other species watched and waited to see what humanity would do with the power they had so decisively demonstrated. Some hoped for leadership and protection. Others feared eventual human domination. But all of them had learned a fundamental truth that would shape galactic politics for generations to come. Humanity had chosen to be peaceful, not because they were weak, but because they were strong enough to make that choice. And anyone who tried to take that choice away from them would discover what they were truly capable of when pushed too far. The creatures that the Zephyrians couldn't command had returned to their peaceful pursuits. But they would always be watching, always be ready, and always be prepared to remind the galaxy that some lines should never be crossed. The new galaxy that emerged from the ashes of the Zephyrian hegemony was a safer place for peaceful species, a more dangerous place for aggressors, and a constant reminder that the choice between civilization and savagery was always just that, a choice. Humanity had made their choice long ago. The question now was what choice the rest of the galaxy would make in response.